remember the first time I walked into our penthouse, the skyline glowing beneath us like it was painted just for that moment. When I married Daniel, the world seemed to bend around our happiness. He was brilliant, charismatic, the kind of man who made everyone in the room feel small except me. Our weekends were filled with art gallery openings, charity galas, and private dinners at exclusive restaurants. I wore designer gowns I didn't even know I could pull off, and he always whispered how stunning I looked, like I was the only person he truly saw. Everything about our life screamed success and romance, and for a while, I believed it. But even then, I caught fleeting moments, glances he gave Serena, a new assistant who somehow always lingered at his side. I convinced myself I was imagining it, that these were nothing. Yet that evening, when he casually mentioned he'd cover her tuition for an elite program, a chill ran down my spine. It was subtle, almost polite, but unmistakable. The first sign that not everything in our gilded life was as perfect as it seemed. I never thought I'd be the punchline of my own life. But that morning, reality slammed into me harder than any betrayal I could have imagined. Daniel called me into the boardroom, his expression unreadable, while my colleagues shuffled in, pretending not to notice the tension. I smiled nervously, expecting a routine meeting, but his words cut through me like ice. "I'm letting you go," he said, calm and deliberate, effective immediately. "We've decided to move in a different direction." The words barely registered at first. I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe this was some cruel joke, but the smirk on his face told me otherwise. And there she was, Serena, standing just behind him, pretending to check her phone. But the satisfaction in her eyes was unmistakable. My heart pounded, my cheeks burned, and I could feel every colleague's gaze slicing through me, curiosity and shock written plainly. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but no words came. How could he fire me for her? For this woman he had whispered to me was just a friend? Anger surged, then a hollow despair, as I realized the betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. This was my life, my career, dismantled in front of everyone I knew, and yet, buried beneath the humiliation, a flicker of something darker began to grow. The certainty that I would not let this injustice stand. No one had ever really noticed the hours I poured into my work beyond the obvious tasks. While Daniel basked in the praise for quarterly earnings, I had been quietly building something far more valuable, an advanced financial system, a program designed to track every dollar, every transaction, every vulnerability in the company's empire. Late nights blurred into early mornings as I coded in silence, fueled by a stubborn determination to prove my worth. I remembered weekends spent hunched over my laptop in the corner of our penthouse, ignoring the champagne parties, the gallery openings, the appearances that made Daniel look like a visionary. Friends assumed I was merely his supportive wife, but they never knew the late-night emails, the endless debugging sessions, the sacrifices of my own ambitions for the sake of the empire I helped sustain. Even when my suggestions were dismissed, even when Daniel praised Serena for ideas I had proposed months before, I kept building, refining, perfecting. That system wasn't just numbers and algorithms. It was my quiet rebellion, my insurance, my secret strength. Every line of code became a small seed of power, invisible to the world but potent enough to turn the tables. And as I sat in the emptiness of the office after being humiliated and dismissed, I realized that seed was ready to grow. I learned quickly how to wear other people's expectations like a coat, heavy, obvious, and oddly comforting. After the firing, I acted small in public, the way they expected. Polite smiles at brunch, soft laughter with friends, careful answers when relatives asked about work. I let them believe the story Daniel fed them, a mutual decision, a new chapter, nothing to worry about. At dinner parties, I nodded as people praised his latest acquisition. I accepted their condolences with a practiced tilt of the head. My voice was measured, my gaze steady, because performance is often the best camouflage. Inside, I was far from broken. Each quiet evening spent alone was a rehearsal for the plan I would not voice. I cataloged memories as if they were evidence. The times my suggestions were praised as his. The way Serena's laugh filled rooms while mine faded. The ledger entries that never bore my name. I practiced being harmless so I could move unseen. They saw the empty calendar and the slow nods. They did not see the nights when I reopened the codebase, or the afternoons when I called old contacts posing as someone else to ask a single, careful question. I smiled at messages from acquaintances who meant well and turned down offers that would expose my intent. Subtlety was my shield. There were moments when friends reached out with real concern, and I let them in just enough to keep suspicion at bay. I cried in the hallway once only, letting a raw sob escape to cement the image of defeat. The next day, I posted a photo of myself at a charity gala with a caption about new beginnings, curated despair. People offered sympathy, and sympathy is a softer kind of blindness. Daniel mistook my civility for capitulation. He congratulated himself in texts I would never answer, sent photographs of his latest trophy weekend, and introduced Serena at gatherings as if she were the natural next act in our lives. He believed the narrative he had written. They thought I was powerless. That phrase sat with me like a taunt and a dare. I wore their assumptions like camouflage and began assembling the components of the one thing I had left. Influence wielded quietly. I would not rush. Revenge is an architecture, not a tantrum. I learned to let bitterness cool into focus, to let humiliation refine rather than consume me. While they celebrated their assumed triumph, I quietly aligned the pieces that would make them regret underestimating me. Soon, their applause would be replaced by stunned silence and questions. Inevitably. Daniel had always thrived on being admired, but after firing me, his arrogance reached a level I hadn't seen before. Every dinner, every meeting, every gathering became a stage for his triumph. He strutted through offices like a king, casually dropping hints of deals and acquisitions, smiling as if the world belonged to him, and in that world, I no longer existed. Serena was never far from his side, laughing a little too brightly, touching his arm in ways meant to announce ownership. They were a perfect tableau of arrogance, and the sheer audacity of their confidence made my stomach turn. Friends and colleagues gossiped quietly, but Daniel didn't notice, or refused to. He posted photos of lavish weekends online, yachts, designer boutiques, exclusive parties. He flaunted bonuses I had calculated and optimized, and he credited himself for decisions I had suggested months before. The boardroom echoed with his overconfident laughter as he boasted of successes that I knew had my fingerprints on every calculation. I watched from the sidelines, appearing as a quiet, defeated former spouse, while inside, my mind cataloged every careless boast. Their underestimation of me was absolute. They believed I had no resources, no leverage, no ability to strike back. And that belief, that smug certainty, was my advantage. Every extravagant dinner, every Instagram story, every casual remark became fodder for my plans. The higher Daniel built himself in public, the steeper the fall I was preparing. Status, wealth, public recognition, they were his armor, and yet it made him blind. I felt the tension coil inside me, anticipation mingled with anger, knowing that the very arrogance he displayed would fuel the most satisfying revenge. By underestimating me, he had unwittingly given me the perfect stage. For weeks I worked silently, the glow of my laptop the only witness to what I was about to unleash. Every line of code I had perfected over late nights and stolen hours became a weapon, subtle and precise. I didn't want a spectacle, at least not yet. My first strike needed to be invisible, a whisper in the chaos, a hint that someone knew what they were doing. I accessed transaction reports, rerouted minor transfers, and planted anomalies that only someone with intimate knowledge could detect. The CEO's empire was vast, and the system was mine in ways he would never imagine. I watched the first ripple spread through his finances, a delayed payment here, a missed invoice there, nothing alarming to outsiders, but enough to make the edges of his carefully curated control fray. Emails I sent from disguised accounts raised minor flags, notifications that would seem like human error. I smiled at the thought, each adjustment a small, silent jab, invisible but potent. The thrill of it made my pulse race, a mix of fear and exhilaration that no champagne toast or gala could ever replicate. At home, I replayed the events in my mind, tracing his arrogance, imagining the moment he would see what I had done. The subtle patterns I left were like footprints only I could follow, and I knew he would never connect them to me. Or at least I hoped he wouldn't. Every time I refreshed the system logs, the anomalies multiplied, and the possibility of exposure made my heart pound. I let the suspense linger, imagining Daniel walking through the office, scanning reports, feeling just the faintest unease without knowing why. And as I leaned back in my chair, I whispered to myself, a smile curling across my lips. I wonder if he'll notice. The first time I leaked the financial data, I didn't make it obvious. A few carefully crafted emails went out to mid-level executives, highlighting discrepancies that should never exist in a company of that size. Within hours, chaos began to ripple through the office. Phones rang incessantly, managers whispered in panic, and urgent meetings were called that Daniel had no idea were brewing. From the outside, it looked like a routine administrative problem, but beneath the surface, the cracks were widening. I watched silently as my former colleagues scrambled, their faces pale and confused. "These numbers don't make sense," one executive muttered during a conference call, her voice trembling. "We need an immediate audit. Everything is off." Another added, "I don't understand. How could this happen? Every report said everything was fine." And then came Daniel's voice over the line, sharp, unsteady for the first time in years. "What's going on? Someone explain this. Now." The confidence I remembered, the unshakable poise, was gone. It was almost intoxicating to hear him stumble, to witness the empire he thought untouchable start to tremble. I allowed myself a quiet smile, careful to remain unseen. The fear of exposure, the vulnerability of his authority, these were my silent victories. He had underestimated me completely, and now, in his disbelief, the very foundation he built to showcase power was showing the first signs of fracture. I leaned back, imagining his confusion growing, imagining him realizing just how little control he truly had. The first strike was only the beginning, and yet already, the seeds of his undoing were sprouting. I often caught myself staring at the ceiling at night, heart pounding, a cocktail of emotions roiling inside me. Anger bubbled first, sharp and consuming, a reminder of the humiliation I endured, of the betrayal I never anticipated. Yet beneath it, a quiet satisfaction began to take root. Every small disruption I had planted, every code tweak that unsettled Daniel's empire, was proof that I was no longer powerless. Relief followed, subtle but undeniable, like the first breath after a long underwater struggle. I had reclaimed control in ways he would never see coming. By day, I maintained a composed exterior, attending social gatherings and family dinners with the same polite smile as before. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling. His once commanding presence was now edged with paranoia, every phone call scrutinized, every report doubted. I listened to colleagues whisper, watched him pacing in the office, his confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. The contrast was intoxicating. His panic mirrored against my calm, deliberate actions, and I could finally breathe in the knowledge that the balance of power had begun to shift. Empathy for myself mingled with catharsis. I had endured humiliation, exclusion, and betrayal, yet now I was the silent orchestrator, the hidden hand guiding his downfall. There was no joy in cruelty, only justice, measured and precise, and a deep sense of vindication that surged quietly through me. Each day that passed, each ripple of doubt spreading through his empire, reinforced a truth I had never allowed myself to forget. They had underestimated me, and that mistake would be the fulcrum of everything to come. Serena seemed to relish every opportunity to remind the world, and me, of her place in Daniel's life. At the company gala, she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, draped her arm around his shoulder, and winked at colleagues as if to say, "I'm the one he truly values now." She posted photos online, flaunting dinners and gifts I had secretly ensured were credited to him. Every glance, every boast was a reminder of how disposable she thought I was, how secure she felt in her ill-gotten triumph. And yet, beneath my polite smiles, something else was brewing. As she strutted across the room, unaware of my presence, I felt a thrill of anticipation that made my pulse quicken. Every careless laugh, every arrogant gesture, was a thread I had already begun to pull. I could see it clearly. She was blind to the storm gathering, blind to the fact that her triumph was only temporary. I allowed the world to believe I was crushed, a defeated ghost haunting my own life, while my mind catalogued each opportunity. With a quiet, almost imperceptible smile, I traced the path from her overconfidence to the unraveling I had in store. They didn't know what was coming, and that made the suspense all the sweeter. I had waited for the perfect moment, the one instant when Daniel's arrogance and blind confidence left him completely exposed. Late at night, when the office servers were least monitored and his attention was elsewhere, I activated the full scope of my system. It wasn't just minor discrepancies this time. Every line of code I had written, every exploit I had secretly embedded came alive. Stock values began to plummet, automated payments failed, and client accounts froze. Within minutes, the empire he had flaunted like a trophy began to crumble in ways visible to the public and undeniable to everyone involved. Phones rang incessantly. Executives rushed into emergency meetings, their voices tinged with panic. "We've lost 3 major accounts in the last hour," one stammered. "The stock is tanking. How is this possible?" Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and incredulous. "What do you mean we're losing clients?" I signed off on every decision. This should be impossible. He slammed his fist against the table, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "Explain it, now. Who authorized this?" I sat back in quiet triumph, watching the threads I had woven unravel his carefully constructed life. Every desperate call, every flurry of frantic emails reinforced the magnitude of what had begun. The mistress, Serena, clutched her phone, her smile replaced by horror as she realized the empire she had so carelessly celebrated was dissolving before her eyes. The boardroom erupted with tension, accusations flying, fingers pointing at systems and reports no one understood. And all the while, I remained invisible, a calm observer amid the storm I had unleashed. I felt a cold, satisfying certainty settle over me. The power I had hidden, the hours I had sacrificed, had culminated in this exact moment. Daniel had underestimated me, and now the world, his employees, his clients, the media, even Serena, would witness the full scale of his fall. The empire he built on arrogance and deceit was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. When the headlines hit the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug gone cold and watched the world I had known rearrange itself. The company I had lived inside for years was a scandal on every feed. Stock collapse, client suits, regulatory inquiries. Daniel's face filled the screens, his confident smile replaced by strained statements. For the first time since we married, people I knew saw him without armor, the image he had curated unspooled in real time. My phone buzzed with messages. Some were short and stunned. Is that for real? Others were kinder. I had no idea. A few were blunt and furious. How could he? People who had dodged my eye in the lobby now sent notes that landed like small, awkward apologies. Employees who had laughed at his jokes sent private messages that said nothing more than, "I'm sorry." Their words were small, but they mattered. The silence that had protected them had been broken. Outside, reporters waited like vultures. Cameras crowded the entrance, journalists dug through past filings, and a lawyer's team assembled. Serena filled her feed with curated calm, the same photos, the same smiles, but the captions read thin against the scandal. Daniel flailed through interviews, his voice cracking as he promised fixes. Instead of comforting him, the clips revealed weakness. In one live segment, he stammered when asked about oversight. In another, he answered without conviction. At the emergency shareholders' meeting, faces I had known for years sharpened with hunger for answers. Accusations flew. Where were the controls? Who ignored red flags? Why had oversight failed? Board members stared at Daniel with betrayal written on their faces. Staff whispered about broken trust. Clients demanded restitution. The man who had once owned the room now shrank under the weight of questions. Every misstep widened the distance between his former authority and the reality of his failure. Competitors circled like predators sensing opportunity. Calls poured in from vendors, partners reevaluated contracts, and industry forums speculated about the future. Threads praised whistleblowers. People who had envied our life debated whether image could ever equal integrity. It was messy, public, indisputable, the opposite of the private erasure I had endured. A message arrived from an old colleague. "We saw you differently after today." "Thank you." Those words were small, but they landed like a warm pulse beneath my ribcage. Vindication was never about spectacle for me. It was about truth carrying weight. For years I had endured erasure, ideas stolen, credit muted, contributions overlooked. The collapse felt like a clearing, an admission by circumstance that what I had known mattered. I did not celebrate with champagne or public posturing. I moved through the aftermath quietly, noticing details I had ignored. Empty seats at gala tables, canceled reservations, the hush at board lunches. When I entered rooms, people shifted their gazes. Sometimes those looks were pity. Sometimes they held a restrained respect, an acknowledgement that I had outlasted something toxic. The fallout was not neat. Careers were shaken, livelihoods uncertain, and legal consequences would ripple for months. Compassion tempered any thrill of victory. There was cost to what I had done, and I recognized that. My actions had targeted the structure that allowed wrongdoing, not individuals who needed empathy for what came next. I carried that complexity like a stone, solid, heavy, honest, Daniel called, his voice small and hollow. He asked to meet, to explain, to understand how so much had gone wrong. I listened to him fumble for excuses that had lost purchase. I could have laid out every piece of evidence I held, could have watched him flinch under the weight, but I simply let the silence do the work. When he finally apologized, it came thin and desperate. I felt something soften, not pity, but a clarity that closure was not the same as revenge. In the days that followed, I found offers to consult, people curious about the system I had built. Allowed myself to breathe. Justice, when it arrives, is complicated and quiet. The vindication was not a crowning moment so much as the slow, steady realignment of truth. They had believed I was powerless. They were wrong. Daniel showed up at my apartment unannounced, a man I had known to command rooms reduced to hesitant knocks and fumbled words. He looked smaller somehow, the confidence I had once admired replaced by uncertainty and barely contained frustration. "We need to talk," he said, voice tight, eyes darting around as if searching for some leverage. I didn't rise immediately. I let him wait, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of what had happened press on him. When I finally met his gaze, I was calm, collected, every ounce of panic, betrayal, and humiliation transformed into quiet authority. My posture, my voice, even the steady rhythm of my breathing conveyed that I was unshakable. "Talk?" I asked, with just enough warmth to remind him of the life we had once shared, but the undertone made it clear that I was in control. He faltered, struggling to find words, and for the first time, I realized he understood the full scope of his miscalculation. He stumbled through apologies, excuses and pleas for understanding, each one met with measured acknowledgement. I didn't need to raise my voice or plead for recognition. The contrast between his fragility and my composed strength spoke louder than anything I could say. "You never saw me coming," I reflected silently, a thought that carried both satisfaction and quiet triumph. In that moment, all the rejection, the underestimation, the public humiliations he had inflicted turned inward. He was exposed not just to the world, but to the consequences of his own arrogance, while I stood firm, respected, and entirely untouchable. The reversal was complete. Weak versus strong, dismissed versus powerful. The scales finally balancing in a way only truth and patience could achieve. The weeks after the collapse were a strange blend of freedom and quiet reflection. Without Daniel's shadow looming over every decision, I began to rebuild my life on my own terms. Offers arrived from companies who had heard of my work, people intrigued by the system I had built in secret. I negotiated opportunities with confidence, choosing roles that challenged me, respected me, and most importantly, allowed me to be recognized for my own skills, rather than someone else's reflection. Each contract signed, each meeting where my expertise was acknowledged, felt like a small reclamation of the life I had lost. Friends reached out differently, no longer tiptoeing around perceived shame or gossip. They listened to my story with awe and genuine admiration, and I felt a warmth in their recognition that I had not experienced in years. Social media mentions, quiet compliments from colleagues, Even casual conversations in public reminded me that I had been underestimated. But now my competence and intelligence were undeniable, and yet, alongside the satisfaction, there was a bittersweet ache. Betrayal had left scars that even success could not erase. I thought often of the years I had given, of nights spent doubting whether my worth would ever be seen, of the quiet moments when I wondered if justice would ever come. Those memories remained, tempered now by lessons learned, resilience, patience, and the knowledge that power is often quietly cultivated before it is revealed. Every morning, I woke with a sense of relief I had never known. I had endured humiliation, crafted my revenge, and emerged not only victorious, but wiser. I could laugh without apology, make decisions without fear, and embrace a future built entirely on my terms. The world had changed around me, but I had changed too, stronger, sharper, and unafraid to stand for myself. In that clarity, I discovered the deepest reward, the knowledge that I had not only survived betrayal, but had transformed it into empowerment, proving to myself and the world that being underestimated was never a weakness, but an opportunity waiting to be seized. Sitting quietly in my apartment, I let the full weight of everything sink in. Daniel's empire was in ruins, Serena's smugness replaced by panic and exposure, and I was finally free to claim the life that had been denied to me. Yet the victory felt different than I had imagined in the heat of planning it. It was not just about watching them fall. It was about the quiet, undeniable proof that integrity, patience, and intelligence could outlast arrogance and deceit. Karma had arrived, patient and precise, but it was my resolve that had delivered it. I reflected on the journey, the humiliation, the betrayal, the nights of doubt, and the careful orchestration of retribution. Each step had demanded restraint, foresight, and emotional endurance. But through it all, I had discovered a strength I had never fully recognized in myself. The lessons were clear. Underestimate no one, respect the subtle power of persistence, and never allow anger to dictate the moment. It is strategy, not impulse, that defines true justice. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers offered congratulations, but I accepted them quietly, aware that satisfaction was not in applause but in the enduring sense of rightness. I no longer needed validation from Daniel or his circle. Their fall had confirmed the truth for me, and yet there was a bittersweet undertone. Success and justice had come at the cost of personal trust and the illusion of what I once thought love should be. As I looked forward, the future felt expansive, unburdened by their shadows. Opportunities, recognition, and self-respect awaited, but more than that, a profound inner peace settled over me. I had endured rejection and emerged powerful. I had been dismissed and proved indispensable in a way they could never comprehend. The final reflection was simple yet profound. Justice is not always loud, but when it arrives with precision, it leaves a clarity that no arrogance can undo. I smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey. I had been wronged. I had reclaimed my life, and I had done it with strategy, intelligence, and unwavering calm. They never saw me coming, and now I stood unshakable, vindicated, and free. The story of betrayal had ended, but the lessons, the empowerment, and the quiet satisfaction of karma would linger forever, a testament to what happens when resilience meets opportunity.